SVIMS has many traditions, but few are as enduring as the travel from Vancouver to Victoria every February that brings us our guest speaker, Paul Kroeger. So we have different speakers, different days of the month, or different months of the year, but February is always Paul Kroeger. And it's wonderful as this furry creature makes his way over from the lower mainland every February to join us here on the island. And as he steps out of the ferry, if he sees his shadow, then for the next 6 weeks, it is sunny weather. Paul has been a good friend right up to this point, and this would be the end of it for more than 4 decades, actually, which is a very long period of time to have such a good friend as Paul Kroeger. I'm a very fortunate fellow. He was one of the founding members and first president of the Vancouver Mycological Society. Often served as its president. I believe I was his vice president at one point in the Vancouver Mycological Society. And he may very well have been my vice president. I'm not sure. That's entirely possible. He's worked at the University of British Columbia, researching the biochemistry of medicinal mushrooms, and is a major contributor to the mycological herbarium collections at UBC's Beatty Biodiversity Museum. And I would encourage people to read the biography that came along with this about how many accessions he has and what a fairly remarkably large percentage of the Beatty biodiversity collections come from Paul. It's quite extraordinary. If you have spent some time in the last number of decades at mushroom shows, mushroom festivals, mushroom courses for SVIMS and other groups, Paul's been there. He is Mr. Mushroom for British Columbia. Paul's published 2 new species of mushrooms, Hypholoma tuberosum in 1987 and Melanotus textilis in 1984, growing in the back seat of a car, I think. Was it not? Melanotus?
Blue jeans, Volkswagen seat cover.
And in fact, not only has he named mushrooms, but people have named mushrooms after him. So there is Cortinarius Kroegeri. And Paul also worked with, collaborated with Bryce Kendrick, Aluna Cheska, and Christine Roberts on the excellent book, The Outer Shores, about the fungi of Haida Gwaii. And did I say shores?
Yes.
I was thinking of the pun that it was based upon. Yes, the outer spores, and I believe there's an opportunity to buy them tonight. Only 2 left, Kurt? Only 3 left. Okay, so don't leave here without one. He's currently working on 2 multi-year projects on toxic mushrooms and health with the BC Poison Control Center and UBC. And I won't take up any more of your time with the introduction. The list of his accolades is long. I believe he's going to talk about his work with poison mushrooms tonight.
Sure, I could give it a whirl.
Yeah, what the heck? What could possibly go wrong? Please, please welcome Paul Kroeger.
All right, I'm going to sit down beside you till I get this working.
Okay. Going out to the people.
Yeah.
Oh, you are screen sharing. Excellent. Well, thank you all. I hope this will be of interest to you. And I'd first like to say that I chose the name Darwin's Elves because we have in Western European culture a myth about Santa's elves who make gifts for children. And it just happens that the German for poison is gift, as in poisonous mushrooms are gift pills. So I thought somehow it would be amusing to call it Darwin's elves because they help to weed out some of the weak among us sometimes. Anyway, that's the explanation for the title there. Now I'll see if this thing advances. And I chose this wonderful image. I was looking for a mushroom elf and found this one. I didn't realize it moved until the first time I did a PowerPoint presentation with it. Yeah. Wink and nudge and thumbs up. And I thank several photographers, including Bryce Kendrick, Adolf Cheska, and others.
Should be.
Okay. So, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And now there's a couple of things I want to make obvious to you, which you probably already know, but it's good to point this out for especially novices. There's a few rules about eating mushrooms safely that are common sense, but people somehow forget about it in the heat of the lust for mushrooms. And there are no simple rules to tell a poisonous from an edible mushroom, except if you feed them to a lawyer or something, you might get a lawsuit. But, there's no real general characteristic. And people often will ask you, oh, you know about mushrooms. How can you tell an edible from a poisonous mushroom? And all you can say is, well, I'm afraid that eating is the way to really test that out. There are no simple rules to help you separate edible from poisonous. So there's myths that they'll turn rice or onions or garlic a certain color when they're cooked in with them, that they'll turn silver black, that they tarnish silver. Some people believe that if you can peel them easily, they're okay. If you can't peel them, they're not. That doesn't apply. People, there's no particular color, odor, shape, anything that really speaks to a poisonous mushroom as such, as opposed to edible. Poisonous mushrooms grow in many habitats. So some people are brought up to believe, oh, if it grows on a stump, you can eat it. If it grows in a grassy field, it's edible. But if you're looking for agaricus, a meadow mushroom, that makes sense. You look in a meadow, stumps, a lot of people eat honey mushrooms from stumps. So in Eastern Europe, if it grows out of a stump, it's okay. That doesn't apply. Poisonous mushrooms grow in many habitats and situations. There is a phenomenon with, and also if an animal eats a mushroom, it's allegedly edible. Well, not necessarily. Some animals can eat things that we cannot eat. And some mushrooms have slow insidious poison. So if you see an animal eat a mushroom, follow it for a couple of days to make sure it doesn't croak, because animals do die from poisoning. Common sense things that people somehow forget with mushrooms. A lot of problems from eating mushrooms come from spoiled mushrooms, simple foodborne illness from bacterial contamination of mushrooms, etc. They should be gathered from pristine habitat. They can take up heavy metals, toxic petrochemicals, pesticides, etc. Pet wastes can be along trails. So you want to try to select edible mushrooms from pristine habitat if you're going to use them as a food source. They should always be thoroughly cooked. A lot of the problems we have from eating mushrooms come from them being undercooked, raw, or not sufficiently cooked. Most mushrooms should be very thoroughly cooked. Some mushrooms contain toxins when they're fresh and raw, but this is eliminated by the cooking process. Eat mushrooms in moderation. Many problems we have are from people overindulging. They find a good edible mushroom, they go wee-haw, fry up panfuls and eat them, then they're surprised that they get a bellyache. And we actually have in the medical records instances of mycobezors where people eat a large quantity of mushrooms and get intestinal blockage, and that which has proved to be fatal on a couple of occasions. And this usually people with impaired digestive tract motility, or people that have inadequate ability to chew food, etc. Eat mushrooms in moderation. Yeah, as a component of a meal, as a nice little tasty side dish, or incorporated into a meal. Eating a good edible mushroom over and over again for some people may result in idiosyncratic sensitivity to that particular mushroom. And it's quite infamous that some well-known mycologists couldn't eat morels because they used to eat morels early on, and then they developed a very serious sensitivity to morels. There's another point which I'd like to bring up, which is that there is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which takes effect especially with mushrooms. This is where a person overestimates their knowledge of a subject when they first begin to learn about it. And then as they develop expertise in it, they underestimate their knowledge because they've learned so much of what they don't know yet that they realize how inadequate whatever knowledge level they have is. But a lot of the people that we have in my consulting with poison control, we often get this history of the patient from the clinical staff or whatever. Quite often there's a little comment that this person said they really knew mushrooms. All right, and that's a very frequent thing because people are so confident they've learned every mushroom in their field guide. They don't realize that there are hundreds, thousands of mushrooms not in their field guide. Now, there are major types of mushroom poisoning. I like to stress this. People tend to have an image that there's just a couple of types of mushroom poisonings. No, there are many different types of poisonings. They have different types of effects on different parts of the body due to different chemical compounds in those mushrooms. Quite often, we don't know what the compounds are responsible for it. Generally speaking, the most serious poisonings are from mushrooms that have a very slow onset of symptoms. And these are things like the death cap mushrooms, Cortinarius, etc., that destroy kidney, livers, do organ damage. And they have compounds that go into the body, are very slow and insidious getting in there, are starting to cause damage long before you feel the first symptoms. So if you have a long period after eating the mushrooms before you get seriously ill, it's a rather somber indication of the type of poisoning that may be involved. A lot of these toxins will be completely absorbed and already circulating through the body. You can't eliminate the poison from the gastrointestinal tract through emesis or whatever. They're already absorbed. They're working their way around the bloodstream through the organs, etc. And so these are the scenarios where you get very serious life-threatening poisonings. In contrast, when you get sickness that comes on really quickly, just minutes or an hour after you're eating the mushrooms, it's usually pretty quick onset nausea, vomiting, perhaps diarrhea. And this generally expels the offending material from your body. And generally, the prognosis then is fairly positive. And with most of these gastrointestinal rapid onset poisonings, the outlook is fairly positive because you've eliminated the toxins, and the type of toxins involved aren't slow, insidious, and working away at vital organs. We do not obsess too much about identifying mushrooms involved in poisoning incidents. They always like to have identification, especially if it's a child or a pet grazing. Somebody observes them, they're able to photograph or collect the mushrooms, get them to a person to look at, and we can take a look at the mushrooms, say, oh, no problem, this is not known to be a problem. Step down, you don't have to go nuts and pump the stomach and feed activated charcoal and put out the medical alerts every now and so. One of my most gratifying functions as a consultant for CDC poison control is to receive photographs of things that toddlers have eaten. I'll be able to say, "I'll tell the parents they don't have to worry. These aren't known to be poisonous." So, and that's a very gratifying message to be able to deliver. Every now and then I'll look at a photograph and go, "Oh, we have a problem." And then in that case, we can immediately initiate activity to help to minimize the damage. And I like to use this crappy picture just to show you the complexity of toxin types involved. It goes from like the very complex cyclopeptide amatoxin, that's that big ring-like structure. And then just below it in box D is very simple hydrazine molecule. So these various compounds, and they run a range of various types of molecules that can be involved in mushroom poisonings. Each one of them has a different effect on a different part of the body. And many of the toxins involved with poisonous mushrooms we don't know to this day. So there's always a chance to contribute to study if you're one of the Dunning-Kruger people. Okay, so there's generally a number of toxin types that are characterized by the type of toxin involved, and the most conspicuous high profile is the deadly cyclopeptides, amatoxins, which are found in the death cap, mushroom gallerina, Lepiota species, etc. Very slow onset of symptoms, 6 to 12 hours, up to 36 hours before the first symptoms. Colicky, abdominal pain, vomiting, watery diarrhea. And for about a day, and then you get remission of these very severe gastrointestinal symptoms of about a day, and then about 72 hours post-ingestion, a second round begins of severe illness. And by this time, the toxins have already gone into the liver and beginning to destroy the liver cells. And the prognosis is very poor in this type of poisoning. Orelanin is something that's really scary, a Cortinarius toxins that take 36 hours up to 21 days for the first symptoms, knocks out the kidneys. And that's one of the most scary types of toxins that we have in mushrooms because of this very long delay. There's a famous poisoning victim, the author of The Horse Whisperer, ate these mushrooms and had to have kidney transplant to save his life. Gyromitrin is another type of false morels. It has 5 to 12 hour delay before the symptoms. You get bloating, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, headache, dizziness, fatigue, fever, jaundice, rarely hemolysis. Okay. Coprine is a neat one. It's compounds found in certain of what we used to call coprinus. Now they're in Coprinopsis, the Atramentarius, some other species, the inky caps. And if you drink alcohol with them, it acts like disulfiram or antabuse, where it blocks the body's production of enzymes that break down the alcohol into glucose at a point. It blocks the breakdown at a point where the byproducts generated by incomplete digestion of the alcohol results in toxic components in your bloodstream that causes these symptoms of illness, flushing of neck and face, metallic taste, numbness and tingling of hands and feet, irregular heartbeat, chest pain, etc. There's muscarine, which is a central nervous system toxin. It interferes with the cholinergic system, and you get perspiration, salivation, and lacrimation, sweating, drooling, and tear production. And these are found in Clitospe, inospe, and some mycenas. Ibotenic acid and muscimol are inebriating toxins found in Amanita muscaria, Amanita pantherina, and pantherinoides. And these cause drowsiness, confusion, dizziness, ataxia, delirium, etc. Psilocybin, psilocin are hallucinogenic true hallucinogens, psychedelics. They're found in psilocybe species, rapid uptake, have fairly profound neurological changes temporarily. And they have now obviously become quite high profile and popular now. Gastrointestinal irritants are a whole bunch of mushrooms. There's all sorts of different mushrooms, many different compounds may be present in these mushrooms that cause gastrointestinal problems, usually the classic nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. And they are often associated with not just people eating the mushroom, but overeating them, undercooking them, and sometimes partially deteriorated mushrooms. We often have these reports coming in of gastrointestinal illness from mushrooms that aren't generally considered to be poisonous, and they could be unknown toxins or one of these other factors at play. Now, there's some other types of poisonings that don't fall into the neat categorization of these major toxin types. So we have Amanita smithiana, which is something that we should be very aware of in coastal BC, because these are mistaken for pine mushrooms. They cause temporary but severe kidney damage and kidney failure. So far, there have been no fatalities from them. But there's been very long illnesses, up to 3 weeks, a month of periodic dialysis and inpatient treatment with these things. So that's quite a drain on one's productivity and lifestyle, you can say. And I'll talk further about that. Paxillus involutus and the other paxilli are somewhat infamous. They cause immune hemolytic anemia. And this is after serial ingestion of them, repeated ingestion of these things. Your body suddenly goes into autoimmune mode and your white blood cells start attacking the red blood cells. So you get this autoimmune generated anemia. And there's some confusion about this because there are accounts of people eating Paxillus regularly, and then we've had fairly serious poisonings from people just eating them once or twice. So we're not sure the whole story there. Turns out that what we call Paxillus involutus is a number of species, some cryptic species. Amanita franchetti I include here because we have our West Coast beautiful brown Amanita augusta, and there is a situation in China where there were 10 deaths reported from one province, from Hangzhou province in China. And they were apparently mistaken for Amanita rubescens, an edible blushing Amanita that's a popular food item. And it caused severe nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, general aching, abdominal distension and pain, and dizziness, etc. And then these fatalities from it were from heart failure, unexplained heart failure of a particular type. I can't remember how it was described in the article, but it was a particular failure of a particular function of the heart in these 10 patients that died. The article about this was, I'm afraid, probably suffered from bad translation, or it was a very hard article to chomp through because they had like photographs of the wrong mushrooms, and they'd have gone through it. But the bottom message there is possibility that there's something severely dangerous about the Amanita augusta that we have, because it's very closely related to Franchetti that was implicated in China. Now, recently, just in 2019, there was a article published that tried to classify these mushroom poisonings more by the body's system affected, or the functioning of the body that was affected by the mushrooms, rather than just toxin by toxin. So they broke it up into cytotoxic. So you have primary hepatotoxic, which are the death cap and other amatoxins, primary nephrotoxic, which is the Amanita smithiana, delayed nephrotoxic, which is the very long delayed Cortinarius oriolanus type. Then it was broken into neurotoxic with the hallucinogenic psilocybin psilocin, autonomic toxicity, muscarine, CNS toxicity, ibotenic acid, muscimol, that's the inebriating ones, Morel neurological syndrome. And that's something quite a few people that eat morels get neurological symptoms from them. So if you eat morels and get all dizzy and woozy and goofy, it could be this morel toxicity. Myotoxic means affecting the muscles, causing toxic effects on the muscles. And this usually causes rhabdomyolysis, which is wasting of the smooth muscle and buildup of the bloodstream, of breakdown products from the muscle destruction. Sorry, not mushroom destruction, muscle destruction. And these are Russula subnigricans is one species implicated in this. So we want to be suspicious of certain big chunky white russulas that stain dark. And those could cause this myotoxicity. And then there's delayed onset myotoxicity, which is the man on horseback or Tricholoma equestrae, which caused a massive outbreak in France of severe poisoning and deaths. And then continuing with this new grouping, they had metabolic or endocrine affecting toxic mushrooms. So we have the GABA blocking gyromitrins, disulfiram like the coprinus, the ones that interact with alcohol. There's some polyporic acid poisoning from Hapalopyrus rutilans, trichothecene poisoning. Now these we don't have here. I don't think we have Hapalopyrus rutilans. Podostroma comudame is one from Asia that has caused apparently severe fatal poisoning just by handling the fungus. This thing's really scary but it's even in Asia, it's supposed to be a fairly rare mushroom. But it just is to show that there are toxins out there that we don't know about. Then there's some hypoglycemic one from Asia, Trogia venenata, hyperprocalcinonemia, Babylata satanas, these red-pored blue staining boletes. Causes this, and this is the hyperprocalcia. Some medical terms are real tongue twisters. Anyway, that's something that shows up usually in association with severe sepsis. So if somebody's got blood poisoning, they look for this particular thing, and for some reason, this mushroom causes high levels of this to be visible in blood testing, and so there's something going on. And then pancytopenia is something that happens with the Ganoderma species from Asia. And this is pancytopenia is diminishing of all types of blood cells. So your red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, everything's diminished. And this is of interest because Ganoderma neojaponicum is related to the reishi Ganodermas. So if you're taking a lot of these medicinal mushrooms and thinking, well, they can never hurt me, they're just, harmless mushrooms. Well, there are polypores that are known to exert toxic effects. And we're still learning about some of these. We don't know if that's got implications at a practical level. I don't know where that's coming from.
It's from somebody put on the.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Gastrointestinal irritant poisoning. This is what I talked about before. All sorts of different mushrooms, different causes, different toxins involved, and not just toxins. Some mushrooms have a lot of antibiotic compounds in them. So if you overindulge in even some supposedly edible mushrooms, you'll knock out your normal gut flora or microbiota. So just like if you're to gobble down a whole bunch of antibiotic or something, you're going to knock your gut for a loop. So that's so a lot of these gastrointestinal irritant type poisonings could be like that. And then there's some oddball things like shiitake can cause a type of rash, a dermatitis characterized by flagellate rash, which looks like you're being whipped. It's red streaks back and forth, usually across the back. And yeah, it's usually eating undercooked shiitake, and it affects just a certain number of people. They found it in Japan when they were doing tests with cancer patients, and they had the study group that were eating lightly cooked fresh shiitakes. They had some one group doing dried, some doing fresh, and the ones that were eating the fresh, lightly cooked ones, some percentage, I can't remember, something like 10%, developed these flagellate rashes. Fresh, fresh, not dried as in, but lightly cooked. And apparently if they're thoroughly cooked, this doesn't occur as frequently. And then there's erythromelalgia, coming from a clitosoby, oddly enough. And erythromelalgia is this thing where your extremities get hot and red and tingly, and sort of pins and needles. And some people get it, some type of nervous, weird thing that occurs. This is actually caused by one type of mushroom. Bacillus syndrome, I've already talked about the immunohemolysis. And encephalopathy syndrome, Pleurocypella porogens killed several Japanese men who had pre-existing kidney disease. They're undergoing periodic kidney dialysis, and they had a bumper year for angel wings in Japan. A whole bunch of these, there were several deaths from, and they were all older Japanese males that were with pre-existing kidney disease. So, and here this poisoning system proposed that perhaps hydrocyanic acids were involved in that. Now there's some other things which, that's an irritant. There's that bar at top is covering the header for the slide.
It doesn't show on. Yeah, it doesn't show on the recording.
Oh, it doesn't? Okay.
Yeah.
So those watching this at home on Zoom won't see that either? Oh, good. Oh, lucky you at home. Okay. Now, I like to point out here that there's several edible mushrooms that also cause problems, and other mushrooms that are of concern, a couple of which I've already mentioned. But several types of edible mushrooms and other mushrooms contain proteins that are hemolytic. That means that they break down the red blood cells. So consuming these mushrooms containing these proteins will theoretically cause anemia to the eater. Now, this is qualified because most of these hemolytic proteins are readily broken down by heat. So cooking mushrooms will break down the hemolytic proteins. A good reason to cook your mushrooms again. Amanita augusta, I mentioned, the related to Franchetti, should be on the suspect list because it could cause this gastrointestinal and cardiotoxic effect. A couple of mushrooms of note that contain oxalic acid and other oxalates are the chicken of the woods, the Latiparus, and the Inonotus obliquus or chaga. These both contain lots of oxalic acid. So if you're concerned about kidney stones or have issues with oxalic acid, you should perhaps avoid these. And we do have also the Latiparus sulphureus, double whammy. It's got both oxalic acid and relatives, and it has hemolytic proteins in it too. So that's not a very friendly mushroom. Then there's several pleurotus that contain these hemolytic compounds too. So that's just that straw mushroom, Volvariella volvacea, is on the list. Enoki or Flammulina velutipes has these hemolytic compounds. I've heard of people eating them. Yeah. We cooked ours tonight though, but we couldn't find, we went to a hot pot place and we kept dropping enoki takis into the broth pots and they kept disappearing. We couldn't find our enokis.
Because Andy kept eating.
Oh, that might be it. Okay. That must be it then. Okay. Yeah. Now, I've been consulting for decades with BCCDC DPIC or Drug and Poison Information Center. And there's some interesting things that have come out of doing this. This is a phone line where they get calls from the public or from health institutions, physicians, veterinary clinics about possible toxic things. So they get lots of calls about mushrooms. And here I've just broken down a 6-year sort of summary of the calls from 1990 to 1995. And that's a six years. And it shows a couple of things that are really interesting. One is we have a very bimodal situation with poisoning, suspected mushroom poisoning calls. A very strong spring and very strong fall. Not surprising because those are our mushroom seasons. But in 1 year, 1995, we had a very wet summer, and there's a great big peak in that top graph showing the summer of 1995, July and August. We had lots and lots of calls about mushrooms. And the bottom bar graph shows the calls coming in for the different years. And the top part, which is sort of a green color, I believe, or something like that, some kind of color, is the ones that are the inpatient. And that means that it is somebody being brought into an emergency department, a health clinic, visiting a doctor's office, going to a drop-in health center, something like that. This is where it's actually brought to medical care center or personnel to deal with. And the other rest of the bar, the large majority of it, are the phone calls that are dealt with just over the phone, and where we are able to look at a photograph or look into it a bit more and be able to deal with it without the person actually making an appearance. We have, well, it's obscuring the headers where I had some information. So what was rather interesting was I then decided to play with a different graph style. And here you can see in the top, the wonderful summer sticking up a peak by itself between the other, in the middle of the valley between the spring and the fall incidents. And then when we even it out, the one below has a blue thing that shows the 6-year accumulated reports. And you can see a very strong spring peak and then a plateau in the summer, which is a sort of an artifact of this one particular year where we had so many summer incidents, and then a smaller but broader autumn involvement of mushrooms with the calls. By the way, the mushroom poisoning calls represent 1 to 1.3% of all Drug and Poison Information Center calls. So it's not very significant, just 1% to 1.3%. The rest are plants, medicines, toxic household cleaners, blah, 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 all sorts of other things that cause effects. Now, I found it interesting. I tried to cobble just 4 years. In the 2000s, we have 2013 to 2016, and we have that bimodal effect again, strong spring, strong fall, but we see a real dip in the summer here. I guess we didn't have a wet summer, and there's another factor that I suddenly realized is in effect here, and that's that most of British Columbia now has summer watering restrictions in place automatically. So we no longer have as many mushrooms conspicuous in urban areas in the summer as we used to. And I might add that one reason that we have such a spring strong peak in these reports is because people are getting out of the houses more. They're and the mushrooms grow in the spring a lot in urban and human altered settings. And children and whatnot are out playing on the lawns at last after the winter. And then something that occurred to me too is you can see mushrooms a lot better in the spring because you don't have a lot of herbage already grown in. So the mushrooms that do come up are much more conspicuous in the spring. So you have a combination of people out and around more, looking around in the outdoors, and then the mushrooms being more conspicuous. So, well, just quickly go through the major poisoning mushrooms, and with lots of pretty pictures. Here's the Amanita phalloides, the death cap mushroom, of which we are so familiar with the hideous cyclic peptide molecule illustrated there. And this is, I got demo victed this winter, and now I look at photos like this I did in my backyard and remember fondly the habitat I created 30 years in the same place, and what my neighbors thought of me laying out mushrooms in a skull and photographing them. Yeah, that's, no, that was my uncle's actually, but he got it when he was at the University of Alberta. Okay, so anyway, and I think Amanita phalloides, you're all probably familiar enough with it, and we've got lots of information out there on the internet and our club websites, etc. There's lots of good information on the death caps, and this is the most seriously deadly mushroom in the world. It's responsible for more fatal mushroom poisonings than any other species of mushroom in the world. We've only had 2 fatalities from it in BC so far. One young child in Victoria who ate them and died. And then the other one was a man from BC who traveled to California and ate death cap mushrooms in California, then returned to BC and then got sick and died of death cap mushrooms. And the death cap mushrooms are sometimes mistaken for the paddy straw mushroom, which has some similarity, and people from South Asia are very familiar with the paddy straw mushroom, but not with the death cap mushroom. This is what most of the Asian individuals that are fatally poisoned are mistaking them for that. And then we have them mistaken for puffball mushrooms too. And the buttons of Amanita phalloides greatly resemble puffballs, but when you cut them open, of course, you can see the mushroom forming inside, unlike puffballs. And when death caps first were found in BC, we started a project to try to document their occurrence and spread. So the Vancouver Club did a systematic survey of Vancouver, and we hit the streets and walked up and down streets with mass plantings of types of trees, and we tried to document as many sites as we could. And we've got over 110 locations now in Vancouver where we've documented Amanita phalloides. They were first found in BC in 1997 and first found in Vancouver in 2008, first found in Victoria in 2003. At Galerina, marginata and some other wood inhabiting galerinas contain the deadly amatoxins. Canosabe or Foliatina phalaris and some related species contain the deadly amatoxins. These and the galerinas previously are little brown mushrooms, so they're mostly a danger to magic mushroom seekers, not to your run-of-the-mill edible mushroom gatherer. And then there are little small Lepiota species that contain the deadly amatoxins. We had a fatality from Lepiota subincarnata, New Westminster man who ate a bunch from his backyard and died of liver failure. And he'd been picking and eating fairy ring mushrooms from his backyard for years. And then one year he picked a bunch, made them into an omelet, and it turned out that these Lepiota subincarnata had grown in his backyard. There's now, we're to the Cortinarius, the orolanin toxins, and just to flap my own little whatever, I put my own species down here because the poisonous Cortinarius are these rather smallish, orange-brown colored Cortinarius that look pretty drab, and there's lots and lots and lots of orangey brown, reddish brown, smallish Cortinarius out there, and they're very hard to tell apart, to the point where one was named after me because I misidentified it more than 40 times. So to honor my competence, they called it Cortinarius Kroegeri, but now it's being changed to Orionarius Kroegeri.
The saints will find you out.
Yeah. And I was rather chilled when we first found it. I assumed it was in the subgenus of Cortinarius where the deadly ones are found, but now the Orionarius isn't implicated in being deadly poisonous. But these are other orangey, yellowy brown Cortinarius that grow abundantly, and they're so hard to tell apart that it's best to avoid all Cortinarii. Gyromitrin, this is a toxin from the false morels, and it's a volatile monomethyl hydrazine, and other hydrazines are the toxic things here, and they cook off. So people used to boil up these false morels and discard the water and then eat the mushrooms. But there were cooks that were poisoned by inhaling the vapors being given off from the cooking mushrooms. And there were commercial canneries in Europe where the workers got poisoned by the hydrazines being boiled off, but the people that ate the canned product weren't affected. And it might be familiar to you, hydrazines, monomethyl hydrazine included, are infamous as rocket fuels. And you might recall a satellite that crashed down to, or a rocket, a propulsion rocket that was used to launch a satellite, came down in the Arctic, and there was a lot of news coverage about the hydrazines fuels in it that might poison the reindeer. And so that's the same type of compound that are in these mushrooms. So generally you want to avoid all the morels and their relatives except the true morels that you really know, and cook the damn morels for sure. You must cook morels. But all the other cup fungi and weird little morel, false morel type things, don't bother with them. Only the actual genuine true morel is known to be safe if cooked thoroughly. Right, all these other things. And Gyromitra esculenta. Esculenta means edible, so it's a bit of a misnomer. And these are generally banned from commercial exploitation around the world, except in Finland. And in Finland, this is a Finnish mushroom book, beautiful book. And they use symbols. So the daggers are poisonous. The asterisks are edible. So this 3 daggers here is deadly poisonous and choice edible. And then a circle means must be cooked. And the Finnish mycologist who gave me this book was laughing about it, saying, oh yeah, Finns are nuts. They'll eat the damn things. It's the only place in the world that still eats the damn things. Anyway. Oh, I was going to ask, by the way, do we have to be out of here at a certain time? Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. So it's not like PFC.
We'll take some questions.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. So I'll keep rolling then. I see it's 8:45 now. So.
And Finland finished.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Coprine. These are the inky cap things. The ones that act like disulfiram or antabuse, where if you eat the mushrooms and you drink alcohol, the alcohol doesn't break down completely in your body. Instead of breaking all the way down to glucose, it gets stuck in being aldehydes or something like that. And so you end up with getting fairly unpleasant symptoms from this. And it's actually something which is being proposed to use for treating intransigent alcoholism. So feeding your boozy partner inky caps all the time might help. Muscarine, this is the central nervous system toxin that affects the autonomic nervous system. And I like to call it drool, sweat, and tears because it causes severe lacrimation, salivation, and perspiration. And it's found in Clitosabe. And we had a dog fatality last year or the year before in Vancouver, a dog that had eaten Clitosabe out of a front yard. By the way, muscarine poisoning. Clitosabe clavipes, Inosabe, a lot of Inosabes contain muscarine. So that's a whole genus like Cortinarius that's best avoided because there's enough toxic members of Inosabe to pretty well blacklist the whole genus. And the Inosabes are really prevalent. They're numerous. In many different species of them that can grow abundantly, and they're all through urban areas under trees and shrubs. They're abundant in the forest. So they're a mushroom that's out there, and they're especially dangerous to dogs. We actually have quite a few dog fatalities from the muscarine containing mushrooms, especially Inosabe. A lot of Inosabes have weird odors, like spermatic or resiny or fishy odors, and dogs seem attracted to odors like that. So we often have dogs that consume the Inosabe. So in May 23rd, 2011, a 2-year-old Chihuahua dog was found dead in a North Vancouver yard after being observed eating mushrooms. The mushrooms were brought in for identification, and we were able to examine them and found that they were Inosabe mixtilis. And classic. No, do you figure? Oh, okay. These were sequenced. These were sequenced. They were sequenced. The DNA from these was sequenced to and was
North American mixed species. I just
oh, okay.
They can't hear you at home. So if you're going to ask a question, it should be repeated by you, Paul. All right.
Okay, yes. Adolf had commented that the mushroom that used to go by the name mixtilis should either be Inosabe chesky or another name. Occulta? Okay, yeah. Okay. So here's the very distinctive cystidia with these little incrustations on the ends and piggy bank shaped spores. And these look really distinctive. It's really wonderful microscopic characteristics. Unfortunately, lots and lots of Inosabe have these encrusted cystidia and piggy bank shaped spores. So it's not as diagnostic as we would like, but yeah. Neurological intoxicants, the magic mushrooms. So we have the Amanita muscaria, that is the inebriating ibotenic acid muscimol type toxins. And these are not very commonly, these are never a problem until just recently. We had occasional, usually young people experimenting with them because they're used as intoxicants in traditional in Eastern Europe and Eurasia. But just recently, several mycologists have been giving demonstrations at forays of cooking and eating amanitas. And David Aurora and some others demonstrate them and boil them and pour the water off and cook them up, and people eat them. And so, but now we've started getting quite a few cases of people that ate these, cooked them up and ate them because they heard that they were edible. But they hadn't heard that you have to parboil them, pour the water off, etc. They just heard that they're edible. So unfortunately, word of mouth sometimes doesn't smoothly translate information. This was from my old backyard, which is now gone. Amanita muscaria comes in different color forms, so it's a bit tricky. And now it turns out that there are several species probably masquerading as one. Amanita pantherina or pantherinoides has traditionally been our most frequent poisoning mushroom. Symptomatic. This has changed. More recently, it's been the agaricus that have topped over the Amanita pantherina because of the information that we've been putting out about poisonous death cap mushrooms. People are now much more hesitant, or much more aware of Amanita in general. So it seems that we have very fewer people eating the Amanita pantherina. They used to be really major. And one year, 1996, we had 11 cases of poisoning with Amanita pantherina involving 14 individuals, 11 humans, 3 were grazing children, 3 people that mistook them for edible species, and 5 were intentional people eating them to become intoxicated. And then there were 3 puppies grazing, and 2 of the puppies died. And this is puppies and small breeds of dogs are frequent fatal victims of mushroom poisoning from Amanita pantherina, pantherinoides as in this case, and Inocebi, and some other types of mushroom poisoning. Dogs, especially small and young dogs, are particularly vulnerable. Psilocybin, psilocin are now big, high profile. There's been a lot of interest in these. We used to have occasional incidents of people mistaking little brown mushrooms for magic mushrooms and becoming poison. Now a new hazard has presented itself. These are so mainline. And now a lot of what's being circulated is cultivated cubensis mushrooms. So most of the people that come into contact with magic mushrooms these days, with the psilocybin mushrooms, are getting cultivated, commercially sold psilocybe cubensis. So the danger of misidentifying wild mushrooms isn't as much there. But they've been used to add to food and drink. And this goes way back to the 60s, 70s, but now it's resurged. So there's now a lot of dispensaries showing up that are openly selling magic mushrooms, including in edible form. So mushroom chocolates, mushroom gummies, mushroom teas. And now we are having increasing incidents of young children and pets getting into edibles in their homes. And this has been really problematic because in some cases, we know somebody will come up and, well, we had these mushroom chocolates and the kid got into them. Other times, somebody finds the kid with a bunch of wrappers and they don't know, they can't remember or know what it was that they ate. So now you can get cannabis chocolates, shroom chocolates at the same store. And so sometimes people will come into emergency and we don't know what they've had, whether it's cannabis, mushrooms, or a combination. And I became concerned when I was looking at these cannabis protests, sort of the 420 and Cannabis Day open markets that they were having in Vancouver before legalization. People started selling a lot of mushroom chocolates and they had cannabis chocolates too. And I looked at some of these booths and they had trays of chocolates and I said, well, which are which? And they're going, oh, well, I think those are the mushroom. Oh, no, those are them. I'm going, well, there's got to be something done here. So with the black market and the gray market, there's real issues of quality control and labeling and
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I had a question. What is kratom?
kratom is a weird plant that is apparently used in Thailand, I think. And it's somewhat like cat, maybe, where I think it's a masticant. Traditionally, it was something that was chewed. And it's become, I haven't been able to figure out, I've seen it being sold and people have tried to explain it to me. As far as I can tell, it might be more of a stimulant than anything else. So it might be like coca leaves. But I know you see that this one place, they sell LSD and DMT. And
Hear you speaking, all right, so we have to repeat that.
oh, yeah. So you're suggesting that kratom was used?
There was some medical
Okay.
uses for it, I think.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, for treating addiction or for helping addiction. Yeah. Yeah, there's another one, Yohimbe, that was gaining popularity for that application also. We're talking plants here, not mushrooms. So let's get back to shrooms. Huh? Okay. And okay, here's, I always like this cartoon here. Top panel says, just my luck, I got the runs my first time trying shrooms. Oh, well, at least I'm not hallucinating. Yeah, and this is something which is of concern because there's a lot of these gray market products now, edibles, they're coming out, and the preparation may not be in food safe situations, and the cultivated mushrooms might not be grown in hygienic situations. So we are getting gastrointestinal symptoms. And I was talking to some of the emergency when Vancouver was having these open markets for the pot activists. I talked to the emergency ward physicians at St. Paul's, the closest one to where the events were held. And they said, oh, they were getting a lot of gastrointestinal cases in people that were at these events and had bought edible cookies and brownies and things, and then they start vomiting and diarrhea and whatnot from food poisoning, essentially. Other psilocybin containing mushrooms include Paniolus, like Paniolus subultiatus, Gymnopolis aeruginosa. And now we got a bunch of the gastrointestinal irritants and some other oddballs thrown in, other things. Now used to be that Amanita pantherina and its relatives were the most commonly implicated mushrooms and poisonings in BC. In the past few years, we've really noted a lot of people presenting with gastrointestinal nausea, vomiting, diarrhea from eating agaricus. And it's always the same sorts of agaricus, which we now call Deerdorfensis and Buckmacadooei. We used to call them Mulleri, and before that Placomyces, and before that something else. And they go by many names, but every time they change the name, it seems to get longer, by the way. And these are characterized by having unpleasant odor, usually chemically, sort of a Lysol, creosote odor, which might be mild. Some people don't pick up on these phenolic odors. Other people really smell them, but some people just don't detect them. They also tend to have thick-edged, felty rings on the stem, and they stain yellow when you cut the base through in lengthwise in half. The stem base will stain instantly yellow, and this is a rare case where there's a set of characteristics that lets you know that a mushroom is poisonous. If you have an agaricus, it smells the creosote sort of chemically, has that yellow staining and a thick edged ring. It's going to be a toxic gastrointestinal type agaricus, so you don't want to eat it. So these are the subsection or subgenus Xanthodermae, and this is the Deerdorfensis, and the classic Xanthoderma showing the yellow staining, which is characteristic of this group of agaricus. Hebelomas are toxic. A common name for hebelomas is poison pie, but it turns out that we don't really have many recorded cases of illness from eating hebelomas in North America. In Europe, there's apparently quite a few incidents, but generally hebeloma is another one of these genera that should be avoided simply because there's enough suspicion of them that it's worth avoiding. And some of them, by the way, grow out of rotting animal remains. So this is an example where avoiding non-pristine habitat can help you avoid poisonous mushrooms. So don't eat mushrooms from rotting carcae. Earth balls, sclerodermas, cause gastrointestinal poisoning. This is the Bletus hematinus that causes the unusual form of poisoning that I mentioned with a very long scientific name for the type of poisoning. Yeah, that one. Entelomas are infamous. The great big fleshy pink spored entelomas are infamous for being poisonous. Trichiloma pardinum is supposed to be a very unpleasant gastrointestinal poisoning mushroom species. Several of the Lactarius are noxious, but they often have very acrid tastes and unpleasant appearance and smell. So people aren't attracted to eat them very often. Ramarias, if they have gelatinous material in the base, are to be avoided. We used to consider this black mold that grows on clavulina to be toxic. It was reputed that they contain T toxin, a fungal toxin, because of this mold, the Helminthospherium clavariarum. It turned out that it was a mistake. People had confused Helminthosporium for Helminthospherium. And because the genus Helminthospora is infamous for producing T toxins on grains and other foodstuffs, it was thought that somebody had confused the names and was saying that mold. So here we've got the Amanita franchetti causing 10 deaths in Zhangji province, China. And they're mistaken for the mushrooms in this picture, the edible Amanita rubescens, but that also species contains the hemolytic proteins. So it's not. So anyway, we recommend that people don't experiment with this species of Amanita. Kidney failure caused by Amanita smithiana, mistaken for the pine mushroom. And sometimes the typical case, 63-year-old made a soup of mixed mushrooms, ate them, had the gastrointestinal and kidney failure. He was hospitalized for 2 weeks and received dialysis over 9 days. And we examined the mushroom, found the typical amyloid spores of Amanita smithiana, which are pinpointed with little arrows in this slide. Amyloid is a blue color reaction of this spore wall that separates one group of Amanitas from another. And certain distinctive cells were visible at the base of the mushrooms eaten. And then the broth, the paper chromatography was performed. Lane 1 is the broth from the soup. Lane 2 is chunks of the Amanita smithiana removed from the soup. Lane 3 is a dried herbarium sample of Amanita smithiana. And the 4th lane is a negative control, a death cap soup. And what is, there's a orange blotch that has an arrow pointing to it. That's where the toxin showed up in the paper chromatography. And the spot for the broth is the strongest for the chunks of mushroom removed from the soup. So this is just to point out that the toxins can go from the mushroom into the rest of the food. So picking the mushrooms out wouldn't have helped because the toxin had diffused. Then we have the Paxillus involutus causes the immune hemolytic anemia. And edible mushroom poisonings are not uncommon. These are the most frequently implicated, not These are alphabetical order, not by severity or frequency, but chicken of the woods, very commonly causing gastrointestinal distress. Honey mushrooms, very common. Lobster mushrooms, very common gastrointestinal problems. We had a very instructive case, and this slide got a bit messed up. Morels, we have quite a few problems with morels. We had a case in 2016, December. A woman presented severe gastrointestinal illness from eating dried lobster mushrooms in a dish with her spouse. The spouse was not affected, but she was severely affected. Taking the history, she's mentioned, well, this happened before November the 8th, 2016. She had cooked and eaten a dish of mushrooms with the same batch of dried lobster mushrooms. Her husband was not affected that time either, but she didn't go to seek medical care because she attributed to having watched the US election results on the news. November 8th, 2016 being US election day, of course. Okay. Yeah. It's 5 after 9. Okay. This is almost the end. So edible mushroom species causing problems include Lexinum species, a lot of Lexinums, Lentinula edodes, the shiitake, flagellate erythrema. Morels again, Phaeolepiota, angel mushrooms, Trogia, chicken of the woods. This is the rhabdomyolysis causing Russula, Lexinums, flagellate erythema from shiitake. Yeah. Fatalities from self-medicating with Agaricus blazei for a treatment for cancer treatment. And there were deaths in Japan from self-medicating people undergoing chemotherapy from liver failure. Morel's banquet in 1991, Vancouver Chief of Police retirement party, included raw morels of shiitake in a salad. 77 or 16% of the 483 participants reported nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. 7 also had cramps, 4 had bloating, and 2 reported hives. Raw shiitake was in that soup. A lot has changed since 1888 when this picture was done. We now know a lot more poisonous mushrooms. Okay, here I've got a few references of people of interest. This, by the way, is a piece of paper that somebody found in a book. They bought a secondhand book and found this piece of paper with a little drawing, deadly mushroom, deadly poisonous. And then on the right, there's cure for acute paranoia.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. Are there any questions from the Zoom audience? If there's, just press your space bar and ask the question. Any questions from, you've got one?
Recommend you do it if there's a possibility of a poisoning, you say rush to a hospital or something, or out the beach or something way out in the woods. Should I carry charcoal on me and do some vomiting? What would be the things you would do right in person?
There's a question being asked from the live audience. A first responder who says that he's in a distant area and a person has had a mushroom exposure. What would you do?
Yeah. Now, did you mention that you carry activated charcoal?
Well, if you say it.
Okay, yeah.
It's,
I would wonder what I would do what I can do to prepare myself.
Yeah, certainly having activated charcoal available is a good thing. Generally, if the scenario would likely be that the person would already be symptomatic by the time that it comes to your attention. And one thing, try to get the history of what they ate to cause it, try to get samples or especially photographs, and contact the Drug and Poison Information Center. And, by, I don't know, I guess if you're probably in radio contact, so you could do that.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of it. Generally, you want to induce emesis or somehow try to eliminate the material from the gastrointestinal tract. If the person is gastrointestinal, try to replace fluids, so get the water going as much as possible. There's generally, if it's even the very serious like amatoxin poisonings, maintaining fluid levels can be vital to maintain. Same with the kidney damaging toxins. Keeping up the hydration can be very important. Trying to think of try to note the symptomology to the point where when you can communicate with a toxicologist, it can.
being a physician and in head of ICU and chief of medicine at one time, the main benefit is symptomatic management for all these patients, these patients with mushroom poisoning. Nowadays, with all the communication devices and all that are available, the best thing to try to do is get a picture of the specimen. And usually you can now relay, I don't know if your service over here has it. I was glad to see that you are possibly got relatives in Sault Ste. Marie, where I was a physician for almost 40 years. And, but, the best thing is to get a picture, send it, because the picture also gives you the site. All right, you can, with the metadata, you can locate the site that people may recognize, but also looking at the specimen. Get a specimen if you can, and if the person vomits, keep that specimen as well. All right, and because we can work on that.
Like induce vomiting, basically, get them to expel it.
But protect their airway.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems and one of the deaths that occurred from Amanita pantoroides is the fact that the person inhaled their vomit, because the first thing they do is have profuse vomiting. And so you've got to protect the airway. And then they go on to have the sort of agitation and then the depression, and they go to sleep. So when people say manage them symptomatically, all right, then you get a call, if you're the physician, what do they mean in poison control of manage symptomatically? And we had one here a couple of years ago that Adolf brought to my attention, and we got the specimen out of the bin, and Adolf identified it, Annaluna, as Amanita pantoroides. And that, in fact, was the specimen out of the bin. The one that was not in the bin was unidentifiable. But you can go by the symptom complex as well. And there was a paper presented in December 2018 of that case. All right, you can use the symptoms. I could give you the paper if you want. All right. And I think we really have to come to the end of the meeting.
Can I ask a question, quick question?
Yes, please.
Paul.
Yeah.
with things like the death cap mushroom, that make you vomit quickly or whatever, and then you die later. Is it the same toxin or are there other things in that?
No,
mushroom
the,
that make you vomit?
with the, I'm asked about the, when you get gastrointestinal symptoms early on and then it progresses to other stuff. In the death cap case, it's a long delay before the gastrointestinal symptoms begin. And that's the toxins, the amatoxins that are going to go on to damage the liver and kidneys. The other syndromes like the Amanita franchetti, where it caused severe gastrointestinal, then a week later, they died of heart failure for some reason. Or the with Amanita smithiana, you get a round of gastrointestinal illness, and then a week later, the kidneys begin to fail. It's quite a while later, the kidneys begin to fail.
So it could be the same toxin.
It could be the same toxin, or it could be they apparently the phallotoxins don't have an effect on humans, but or at least not orally. But yeah, there's others like the yeah, and some we had a really weird case of what's it? It was either chicken of the woods or lobster mushroom, where we had a couple that got fairly intense, fairly florid gastrointestinal stuff for a while. And then for some reason, like 2-3 days later, they both became sick again and had really prolonged problems. So it almost seemed like two things at work. But then we found out later that they'd recovered a month or two earlier from a very severe bout of some viral gastrointestinal disease, maybe some foodborne virus or something. So their systems apparently were weakened. So they did a round of the fairly florid, quick onset reaction to the mushrooms, and then their systems were all buggered up because of it. So, but yeah, I don't know. To my knowledge, there aren't that many multiple toxin mushrooms out there, except we saw that the chicken of the woods has both oxalic acid and hemolytic proteins. Yeah. Okay.
All right, I have to call this meeting to an end. Paul, thank you very much, and thank you,
Okay.
the audience, for being so patient.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
No, I had trying to close the Darwin's Elves and then pull out.